You're listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Proska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Clémence Scouten, who is a family history specialist. Clémence is the owner of Memoirs More, where she helps people write and privately publish their memoirs and books about their family history. She also helps clients who want to research their family, document family information, as well as information about their family business. Clémence, welcome and thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. I'm terrific. And thank you for having me. I love doing this sort of thing. And I love Friends Life Care. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks.
And I'm so excited to have you. So just to tee up the episode, you're joining me today to talk about leaving a legacy.
Yeah.
Throughout the episode, we'll discuss memoir writing, family history books, ethical wills, and more.
Yes, if we have time. That's a lot.
If we have time. We'll try to get through it.
Yes, we'll plow through.
So to start, can you tell us a bit about your background and how did you get into this field?
Sure. I mean, I'm not, I didn't go to business school. I don't have an MBA. I wasn't out to, start my business and do things like that. I'm an English major with a graduate degree in English, and I'm here every time I sit in front of my desk and think, I'm going to start work today, I'm surprised I'm even doing this. But the thing that brought me to it is that after working, I grew up in a car insurance company doing marketing and communications. And then I helped the founder of the company produce some books. And it was just so much fun. And separately from that, my father, who had died when I was 22, had written his autobiography for me. And then my mother, when she was dying, wrote something. And so, the experience of having these documents to turn to when your parent is gone is incredibly meaningful. And I never would have learned about that absent having them myself. And so between not wanting to work in car insurance anymore and loving books and loving reading and loving these documents from my parents and, having a big birthday and wanting to move back to Philadelphia, my hometown, I just, figured I'd give it a try and put up my own shingle, and I did, and here I am.
That's incredible how you turned all of these life experiences into would you say like following your passion and turning it into like a career opportunity?
I guess so. I'm always, this is a whole separate topic for a podcast. I'm not one of these people who encourages others to follow their passion. So, it happens that I was interested in this subject. It was personal to me, and I had the skill set. I was good at what I did. And so I knew that I could hopefully learn the business side of things, of running a business, which is, by the way, a huge part of my day-to-day, but that I had the base for, being able to write and produce books. Without that, follow your passion. I mean, it's good when you're 20, I guess, but not, I'm not courageous enough to reinvent myself from scratch at this point, so.
So for someone who is interested in writing their memoir, where should they begin?
So the first step is to just think about what you want your grandkid or your kid to be able to say about you to their child, right? So let's imagine you have a grandchild and they're an adult now, you're long gone, and they're talking to their own child about who you are, and boy, Pop, Frank used to take me fishing when I was a kid. He's the one who taught me how to fish. Or, whatever, or pop, Granny Jenny is the one who taught me how to make this apple pie, or is the one who taught me how to drive, or is the, or I really admired her because. And so you think about what you have to give to the future generation in terms of family stories, life experiences, family history, wisdom, right? You have all this stuff up here that you may have done your estate planning, right? You have a will, hopefully, you have all that stuff done, but what's all this? Where's all this going? Take the time to document that. So it could be something as simple, we don't have to overcomplicate things. We're not writing War and Peace. It's okay if your memoir is 10 pages or 20 pages. It doesn't, and this is where we get into the objections, right? Oh, I don't know how to do this. Oh, I'm going to make spelling mistakes. Oh, we were traumatized in school by our, the red pen is what I like to call it, by these teachers whose job it was to teach us to spell and to write properly. But this notion that we're going to do it wrong. You're not in this to write a bestseller. If you're in this to write a bestseller, this is probably not the right podcast for you. I don't coach people on that. I don't know how to do that. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in helping people get to the core of what they care about and pass that on. So put all these kind of false excuses aside. Imagine it this way. If you had a 10, 20, 30, 100 pages from one of your ancestors, from your grandfather, from your grandmother, from your parent, would you care if it had spelling mistakes? No, of course not. You'd be thrilled that you had this document. Would you care if the person said, I caught a fish this big, and really, it was only this big? Yeah, so we de-embellish when we storytell. That's fine. That's fine. The reader knows that. So the other problem I hear a lot is that this is an ego trip. Nobody cares. My kids already know the story. First of all, they don't know it as well as you think they do. They do care, and they're going to care more when you're gone. And it's not an ego trip. It's the opposite. It is a gift. This is a gift of love. So, so get away from these false excuses. That's kind of step one. And then where to start will actually come easily once you're kind of in the mood to do this.
How about some memoir writing exercises or prompts that could help people get over that hurdle and get started?
Sure. So one of the tricks I suggest is because writing is such a kind of solitary exercise, you're really all on your own to think about stuff and to figure out how to write it and what you want to write about. If you can find yourself this is a very fashionable term, but an accountability partner. So find yourself a writing buddy, and maybe, or a gal buddy, whatever. And maybe this is someone who, it's a relative, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone who you happen to know in your circle of friends who is also interested in doing this and doesn't know how to do it. And you just agree to meet every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is. So, and so that you have something to, somebody to bounce ideas off of, because your spouse is going to be supportive and interested in the beginning, and then they're going to get bored with this idea of yours that you're talking about all the time. So,
yes.
So you can count on them a little bit, but it's better to find this partner sort of who's in it too, doing the same thing. So, so you can talk about, all the tricky things, like, I feel like I'm talking about one of my children more than all the others. Like, are you experiencing this too? Or, by the way, try not to do that. Jealousy does not age well. Kids get jealous of stuff when they're 65 just as much as when they were 5. So, so that's one thing. In terms of writing prompts, so as I said earlier, the first thing, right, is to think about what you really want people to know about you. So for some people, that's their career. So it's not so much a writing prompt, but here's what I did for a living. For some people, their memoir is just going to be about an important time in their life, right? So maybe you want to write about your experience in the military, right? So that is an encapsulated thing. And I won't have a particular writing prompt for that, But one idea is to start with something very specific in terms of the very broad. So if I had a client come to me and say, I want to talk about my time in the military, the type of question I would ask is, tell me about your first day of basic training, right? Because that's the type of moment they remember. I mean, it's their first day dropped into this crazy thing. And it takes you back to this point in time that then from there it springs from a well. I mean, you just start talking and thinking and whatever. Whereas the question, well, tell me about your time in the military, that's way too broad. I mean, well, I don't know. But when, starting with this very specific question within this greater theme is how one way to get started. So you can imagine how you would take that to other subjects. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And a couple things that are coming up for me so far is like a theme of leaving your essence. So whatever, maybe your essence is that you were very career oriented. Maybe your essence is you're really into the family or your garden, whatever it is.
Yes.
That for me, it sounds like that's a great place to get started. And also another place to get started is to think about in general what you want to talk about and then start with the poignant moments.
Yeah.
So like, for example, I'm thinking if I wanted to talk about something with family, maybe we could start with a holiday that always stood out or something like that. And then the creative juices may start flowing from there.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. If everyone were left to their own devices to write their memoir, they would all start the same. I was born on March 7th, 19 whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't start with that.
Nobody wants to go back that far.
No, yeah, that's the first problem. But also it's not that exciting. You want to captivate the reader early on if you can. Although again, don't let your fear of not being a good writer prevent you from writing something. You could start with there's so many different ways you can start. I mean, and you don't have to start with the beginning. That's part of it, right? It's not, your reader has a brain. I mean, they can figure out that if you want to start with an episode from your childhood, it's not the first part of your life. Or so start with what interests you. Like one of the reasons this notion of a prompt is so tricky is that everybody has a different approach to writing, and for different things are going to work for different people. So if I'm sure a lot of people in this podcast who might listen to this are, they're educated. They have training in fields, they were professionals, so they've written, right? You've written memos, you've written reports, you've written papers, you've written letters, like you know how to write. So it's just a question of changing the subject. And again, if you worked in industry and all the stuff you've ever written are reports, still just start with what you're comfortable with. It's okay. I mean, if you need to pretend this is a memo to your child, start with writing a memo to your child. It doesn't matter. And then you can edit it. You can go back and edit it, or you can take it to your writing buddy and say, I'm stuck. I've written this thing. I'm afraid it's not interesting. What do you think? And then the writing buddy is going to say, oh, wait, no, first of all, this sounds like you, right? Voice is really important. You don't, if someone came to me and said, let me rephrase that. When people come to me, my first goal is to preserve their voice. Right. So I'm not going to sit there and make them sound like somebody else. It defeats the whole point. You want this person reading this thing to be able to hear you when they're reading in their head. Right. So you have this memo format of a letter, which is a ridiculous example, but or a memo format of a memoir, and it still sounds like you're getting it done, you're putting it on paper, you're getting it out of your brain, and then you can work on it, then you can tweak it, that's my big fear, is that people are going to leave without getting these stories out of their mind, right? You may be the only person in your family at this point, you the reader, not you, Cheryl, although maybe Cheryl too, who knows the most about your family history. right? If you were hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to know the stories about Granny so-and-so, right? If the answer is nobody, get a pen and paper now. So,
So what would you say makes a good memoir?
yeah. So, again, this is like one of these reasons, like it's not going to be any good, so I shouldn't write, I shouldn't do it, I'm not good enough to write. So I always try to help, but suggest to people not to worry about whether it's good or not. And your kids, your grandkids are going to love this because they love you. Like that's the punchline, that's the joke. It's that simple. They will love what you write because they love you. So if you have a strong interest in, here's an example. One of my first clients was a truck driver. And so he wrote extensively about the trucks he drove, right? Because that was his work life. He did a lot of that. He had different trucks and he did a different number of, I don't know, things in the engine. And whenever he started talking about that, before it, he put boring alert because he knew nobody would care. And that way the kids can skip that part. So that's one tip, is that you have a deep interest in something that's very technical, very narrow, and you know the family doesn't care about that. Just skip it, right? Now, if it gives you pleasure to write about it, definitely write about it. But a good memoir, does have information that people are going to be interested in. So what are people interested in? They're much more interested in hearing about stories from your childhood. Yeah, what was it like growing up in the 50s or the 40s or the 30s or the 60s, whatever, however old you are. What was life? I mean, it's like a science fiction story to kids today, because guess what? There was no internet, there were no cell phones, there was, you may have learned to drive a car that had a stick, it wasn't an automatic. I mean, do kids today even know what that is? So that kind of stuff is fascinating to next gen. The other sort of thing that people are interested in about is when your life or your family's life or people in your family have intersected with big moments in history. So, so the classic example is, where were you when JFK was shot, right? But it's so much more than that. So I already mentioned the military, especially for prior generations being in the military. World War II, all the men went, right? And even if you had like a legit reason, like you had tuberculosis, my father had tuberculosis and was not able to go, they didn't let him enlist. He felt bad about that. So, everybody went to war for World War I and II. And those are, people want to hear about that. It's not that they want gore. It's just that, oh, wow, I had this family member who, was at D-Day and same thing for women, a little differently, but like a lot of the women I've met want to talk about how the feminist revolution impacted them or didn't, I mean, the 60s were a very turbulent time. So where were your family members when that was happening? What was going on? How did that impact you? So there's so many ways that our lives are, just like the COVID thing, right? Our grandkids and great grandkids may have questions about that. Just like families, remember when COVID first came out, we were all sitting there thinking like, or hearing about people who had some relative who survived the 1918 flu epidemic. It's the same thing. So those are the types of things people are really interested in and that make a good read, right? It's even if it's not super well written, although I think you will do a better job than you think you will.
Something that never would have come up for me is the intersecting with big moments in history. However, I'm thinking about my grandfather who was in the Navy. He couldn't be deployed because he had the flu when his group was heading to war. So he stayed and he worked instead in the infirmary and took care of the individuals who were injured and came back. And he never talked too much about it. My grandmother would talk and tell me more about it, but that has stood out to me for my entire life. So that's very poignant that you brought that up.
Yeah. And aren't you happy you know that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And don't you wish you knew more? Don't you
Yes.
wish he had kept a journal
Mm.
that captured some of that, right? So
And sometimes,
spelling mistakes and all.
and I mean, I sometimes it's easier to write things down than to really like verbalize in person, face to face with someone. So that, like, to me, that might be even like a way for people to get things out that they might not want to talk about.
Absolutely. And look, it's not a tell-all. You choose to write what you want to write about. Like no one's, I mean, that is up to you. You had a first family, you got married twice, and the first marriage was a catastrophe, and you still cringe even though you're 85 years old now. Don't write about it. It's okay. So
Yeah, it's at your discretion.
it's at your discretion. But I'll tell you, right, legacy is a funny thing because when you're gone, someone else is in charge of it. Someone else is going to define you, right? Someone else writes your obituary. Somebody else says, well, this is what Pop did or Granny did. Not you. So, some people don't care. I'll be dead. I don't care. Fine. But
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendsLifeCare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. So you've touched on this. I just want to give the opportunity that are there any other common challenges you have found people face when writing a memoir? And I mean, you as the expert, how do you help people overcome the obstacles?
well, I will say that most of the people who hire me because they don't want to do it themselves. So,
Okay.
so I don't have a ton of experience helping people. What I will say is that people who keep putting it off don't really want to do it, right? It's like everything else. Like if you want to do it, you do it. You find the time. The things that people, the hurdles are the things that we don't know how to deal with, right? So kind of like this example I just said. So here's right. So you've had two marriages, you have two sets of children. You get along better with one set of children because it was a better marriage. Well, so those are the times when you want to be, right, when not you want to be, but when just naturally you're more sensitive to the reader. And so one option is just don't talk about it, right? If you don't know, if you're afraid that one set of children from the unhappy marriage is going to feel slighted, that they didn't get as much airtime in the book as the second set, then just, first of all, either find a way to write good things about them or don't do it. Just don't talk about them at all, right? The memoir, unless you want to specifically talk about parenting, which some people do, the memoir really is more about you and your past and things like that. So you want to talk about how hard it was to be a parent? Absolutely. You want to talk about what it was like to drive your kid with 104 fever to the hospital at 3 a.m., go for it. But if you're worried about what the kids will think when you talk about them, don't talk about them. It's a tricky thing to do anyway, right? So there are lots of examples like that. Start with what interests you. Keep with what interests you. If you're not interested in it, it's really hard to motivate. So if you don't have an interest in family history, not everybody does, then don't write about family history. If you don't have an interest in writing your memoir, but it's so fashionable, right? Like everybody's doing genealogy research. You probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast anyway, but like, if people are trying to convince you to do this and you just don't want to, then just don't. Why? Why torture yourself? So, but if you're just stuck, you're having writer's block, that's turn to your writing partner, your buddy, and have a chat about it. And then just remember, again, things we often get writer's block about are, this isn't good enough, this doesn't sound good, this, no one's gonna read it. So, cut the pity party. You're doing a better job than you think.
Do people ever consult with their children or grandchildren, nieces, nephews, loved ones, and inquire, what is it you want to hear more about as a place to start?
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. Especially as I mentioned earlier, if you're kind of like one of the last people who has, the vault of data, because they might say to you, I want to hear about that great aunt who started a business and, and made, I don't know, whatever, or, or I want to hear about when the family came to America. Tell us more about, where they came from, or, and you might, I don't know what they're going to say, but that's a great place to start. That's a great place to start. Yeah.
Anything more we should say about how to write about the difficult or painful experiences? And I understand one avenue could be don't do it if you don't want to. However, for people who are inclined, any advice?
Well, I will say overall, writing, the process of life reminiscence is very therapeutic. I mean, there are people who actually study this stuff, who've done experiments of putting people in a cold room and asking some of them to think back to happy times, and they feel warmer. I mean, it's incredible. So, so I do think there is a benefit for some people who have this thing that's, really kind of eating them, that they want to try and get it on paper as a way of getting over it. And there, I think you need to kind of really just follow the core of what it is you're trying to process, which could be different for different people. Is this a situation where I mean, there's so many tricky and different situations. Some people struggle with addiction. Some people struggle with abuse. I mean, it's just, a terrible, horrible divorce. There's death, losing a parent at a young age. And when it comes to writing down your feelings, it's really hard because it takes so long to even feel validated that you're allowed to have those feelings. But I if you want to do it, go for it, see how it feels. There's no, I'm not a specialist in this, so I wouldn't, as far as I know, there's no perfect way to do it. There's not like first you talk about where the abuse started, and then you talk about who abused you. And, I doubt there is a system for that. But, I say good luck to you. I hope that's helpful to you. Because it can't, writing and life reminiscence is very therapeutic.
And just to go back to, if you write it down, you could do an edited version to share, or you could get it all out and not share it at all. And then at least you've done it for you, and perhaps that could help you move forward in through the rest of your life. That's what it sounds like.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think you could find, if you're really interested in this particular category of writing, I think you would find, as opposed to having a writing buddy, you will find other people who have the same interest in writing about trauma. Because there are a lot of people who've been subjected to trauma, all different sorts. And so there you might find a writing buddy or a group, right, who's engaged in this. I'm absolutely sure they exist. So I wish you good luck, but it's a great way to transition to ethical wills if you want to, because here's this notion, ethical wills is more about leaving a shorter, and so instead of writing, even though you can write a short memoir, that's perfectly fine, right? Technically, autobiography and memoir are not the same, have a different meaning. Autobiography is when you do your whole life from A to Z, from your birth date to your death date, pretty much. Memoirs are meant to talk about kind of one period. So my time in the war, my time as a mother, my time, whatever. I use them interchangeably because memoir is shorter and that's what everybody uses. But so it's fine if you want to write a short memoir, write a short memoir. But ethical wills, or what they call legacy letters, are more this type of document that's meant to, I mean, you can share it with your children while you're still alive, but they're much more condensed, short versions of a memoir. Here's what I care about in life. Here's my dreams for you. Here, it's much more of a love letter. Here's all the ways you've made me proud. Here's how I approach decisions. So it's just kind of like as I said, a very condensed version of a memoir, much less storytelling and much more reflection on the core values I want to share.
And would you say leaving an ethical will or a legacy letter, is that like a one and done, or are these typically geared toward individuals in your life? Both either.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because they require a lot of work and they talk about things that like if you have 4 children and you're going to talk about your value system, you're going to write 4 versions of that. No, you probably write one for all 4 children. And probably it doesn't need to be updated. You're not going to change your whole value system from one year to the next. So it really tends to be once and done, unless there are things that happen that that you feel need to update. So maybe you're diagnosed with something and you feel that's life-threatening and serious, and you feel compelled to write something while you're still doing really well, right? Before you start chemo or before you start radiation or before you get this crazy operation that you may not survive. So you write something at that point about the things you care about and, this life you've had and the hardships and the ups and the downs. And then you survive. And then maybe you say, okay, well, now that I've survived, I actually want to talk about my survivor story. And I want to talk about how, I realize I've had a really easy life till now. I thought I had some hardship, but in fact, this past thing made me realize what hardship really is. And I want to talk about that. And so that in that case, you can update your legacy letter, certainly. But for the most part, it's once and done.
So a legacy letter or an ethical will is really geared toward what are your values, what about is important to you, and the way that you show up in the world that you want to leave behind for your loved ones.
Yes, that's it. I mean, when you write your memoir, all those things you just described come across through storytelling, right? Here are my experiences. Here are the stories that happened to me. Here's how I started my company. Here's how I worked to the top in my law firm. So when you're telling those stories, the values of hard work, discipline, long hours, whatever it is, those come through naturally. The reader learns of your values by reading your story. When you're writing an ethical will, you kind of take the shortcut. It takes me one sentence to say, you guys all saw how hard I worked to provide for you. It was a pleasure. I was thrilled to give you the childhood you received. But hard work is part and parcel to who I am, right? So instead of writing a whole thing about what it was like to be a lawyer, now you've just condensed it all into 3 sentences.
Got it.
So that's how it's different.
And then what about family history books?
Family history, so much fun. So family history, again, genealogy, I have ancestry.com to thank for the fact that I actually can have a business out of doing this stuff, because they've made it so possible to reach documents and information that wasn't possible, before the internet, frankly, before digitization and the internet. So it's easy to get quickly overwhelmed with family history, right? Because you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and just the exponent is so quickly big. So there you want to, are you asking me kind of more specifically how to start on your family history, or?
I would just love to hear, if you wanted to do some type of family history book. And I mean, that could take, in my brain, it could take the form of a family tree, or maybe it could take compiling like I love to write notes and letters, and sometimes I'll save like a Mother's Day, like my first Mother's Day card, things like that, or
Yes.
pictures that were important from my childhood or that my grandmother has given me from when she was at the beach and she was 22. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have all these things. I'd love to compile them. Yeah,
Yes.
how do I do that?
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. I'm just glad I asked because I didn't want to go off in the wrong direction. There's definitely a scrapbooking element, right? Or to the idea of family history, because what you've described is, everybody has this box of stuff that they've saved, whether it's from their life, their childhood, their parents, their grandparents, etc. And so you look at it and you're totally overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. There are so many options, and it's tough. So one option is to keep the originals and create a sort of album with these things, with captions that describe, well, this was my first Mother's Day card, and that I got from this child, and this was, I don't know, my bracelet from the hospital when my child was born, and things like this.
Mhm.
And that's true for ancestors too. Here is my grandmother's, for instance, I have my mother's sewing homework. I have a little
Wow.
of my mother's sewing homework. And it's impossible for me to throw that away, even though it has absolutely no value, and I don't sew. But those are the things that we really struggle with. And it's okay to keep them. But if you have siblings and people you want to share that with, then you should digitize them and get them in some sort of order. And that allows you to, one, it makes sharing really easy, and then you can write about it more easily, right? So maybe you're the only one who knows what that thing is. So you have to document it and then share it with the family. And so what you'll see happen is you have categories. And so whether you want to create an album or whether you want to just create a folder that you share, this one's about my mom, this one's about my grandparents, this one's about the property we have that the family's been sharing for 100 years. This one's about whatever. And just as with writing the memoir, you really need to break it down into small small manageable chunks. You can't just dive in there and just start writing or just start doing this and think that it's linear. It's super not linear. There's so
Mhm.
many different ways to go. And sometimes you get bored with this way and you do this way instead. And so you want to do a family tree? Absolutely do a family tree. Family trees are really helpful. And because of places like Ancestry, which is a paying site, but familysearch.org is free. You have to set up an account, but Family Search is free and has a ton of stuff. You can now build out that family tree or get lucky and maybe somebody else has already done it, although you need to
That'd
verify
be
that,
nice.
right? So what goes into a family history project? It can be a family tree, it can be these thematic things, it can just be photos, right? Some people just have a ton of photos, although I would encourage you to cull your photos because we all have too many of them and a lot of them do not need to be kept.
Yes, I
Um,
know.
yeah. Well, and remember, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but back in what was it, the 80s and 90s, like everybody ordered everything in duplicate and triplicate. So you
Oh,
have,
yes.
oh yeah,
Yes.
yes. So you have a picture of like the rhododendron one year when it was beautiful, but it's a little blurry. And now you have 3 copies of it. Just throw it away. Nobody wants that picture. Throw it away.
Mhm. I
We
know,
don't need
and
another.
it can be so hard for people to part with that picture.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I I know. Well, how many more pictures do we need of the Eiffel Tower of the Grand Canyon? We do not. We do not.
Mhm.
Unless you happen to be in front of that, or somebody important to you is in front of the Grand Canyon and you're taking their picture and it's the only picture you have of them, then keep it.
Yeah, that's
But,
a great point.
it's a lot of travel pictures should just not be kept. The
Mhm.
pyramids have been documented. So,
Before we close, just a couple more things. And one,
sure.
I would love if you'd be willing to share a success story of one of your clients that you helped with a legacy project.
I mean, it's the sort of recognition I get from clients is are statements like this. and this is a real statement from a client. My sons said they read things they never knew about my husband and I. And they can't believe it. They're surprised because they think they've told their kid this 100 times, and yet the kid either doesn't remember it or just didn't hear it, right? You tell your kids a lot of stuff and it doesn't it doesn't sink in. So you have, and this is a classic example of why I think it's important to document some of your life stories and family history stories, is because you think you've told them, and maybe you have, but you lose data from one generation to the next. So there's a huge value in that. I viewed that as a huge success. It's just one statement, but like, my kids said they learned stuff they didn't know. I mean, people listening to this are going to say, no, my kids know. My kids know. I've told them. They know I love them. They know the story of how I met their father, whatever. Well, let me tell you, when you're gone, if they have a legacy letter from you or a document from you in which you say, I love you, never forget how much I loved you, right? Because don't we all wish we had a letter from our mom that said that?
And your child or children, they're meeting you at a finite point in your life, and they know you from then on. But there was many years for most people that you were still you, but you lived a very different life. Parenthood is, can change a lot of people. So and you tell a story once, what that person retains, they're not necessarily. So that stands out to me.
And another thing is which you remind me of, is that because you interact with people at a certain point in time. Let's say your parent dies at age 75 or 80. Fine, you're whatever age you are, you're 55 or something like that. Well, when you're 75 or 80, what do you wish? Now you can't talk to your mom anymore. You don't know what their life is like, except your memory from 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. So, for you, even as a senior a senior to write down, like, this is how I feel about parenting today. Like, I felt this way about parenting when I was 40 and knee deep in diapers, or 30 and knee deep in diapers. But at 80, I wish I could hold an infant in my hands again. Give me a diaper to change. I miss it terribly. Whatever it is, right? We change too. It's not just that, the stories change, like we change. So, so that's a success story. What other success stories I have? People often write to honor others. So if you want to write, a memoir/family history, but you want your memoir to be about your recollections of your parent, right? So it's not really, it's almost like you writing a biography of your parent. That's a process of honoring someone else. And those are hugely satisfying. And I had a client who we did that for his dad. In fact, most of my clients, some are memoir clients, but there's always a component about talking about your parents who you love. And so there's, you feel like you've done good as a child, as your parent's child. You feel that you've honored them. You feel that you've provided documentation for future generations. It's, this is, those clients really, and again, once and done. So there's a lot of work and there's a cost and there's all those things, but then it's over. Like, you don't do this once a year. So.
Right. So before we conclude, if you could leave our listeners with one or two pieces of advice that could encourage them, or if they're thinking about embarking on a legacy project, what would you say?
Well, so, you brought this up a couple of times, like, there's a lot of ways to get discouraged or just, to stop. And there are a lot of people who can help you. So if you're someone who's very nervous, maybe you didn't go to college, or maybe you didn't whatever, and you're nervous about your spelling, or you're nervous about your grammar, there are proofreaders out there, right? And proofreading, I'll tell you, is really not very well paid. So you can write someone and then get a professional to proof it for you, or to edit it for you. You can hire copy editors. Again, not really that well paid. So it's not going to cost you $1 million. And then you can really feel good. Like if you were at all worried that, it wasn't going to sound right, there are really easy ways to take care of that. And by the way, even if you feel good about yourself and you're a great speller and you've written all your life and you're a retired professor, you know what you're doing, get yourself that proofreader anyway. I mean, it's just so helpful. So there are a lot of different areas like that. If you have your manuscript, maybe we have people listening to this who have already written something and now they want to take the next step of publishing it. So it's one thing, only you can write your memoir, right? Either you hire someone to help you or you do it yourself, but really you have to be involved in that. But for printing, that is not the case. So even if you feel that you have a good comfort level with the internet and you think you can handle online printing or whatever, just hire somebody. Printing is a whole nother, designing a book, it's a whole thing. It's a lot harder than, it's not something I encourage for do-it-yourselfers, even if you're a good do-it-yourselfer, it's really hard. So there are lots of times at which you can call in for help, and keep going instead of, then, because what do you really want to do? Maybe you don't care, right? So then just don't worry about it. But if you want to see this thing through and have it look good and you're worried it's not going to look good, there are lots of people who can help.
And you and your company being a premier place that people could
Yes,
get their help. So,
that's for sure.
well, how can our listeners get in touch and learn more about you and Memoirs and More?
Sure. Well, so memoirsandmore.com, or they can call you for my telephone number if you don't mind. I will say I tend to work best with clients who don't want to do any of it. So someone who just wants to be interviewed, and then I just do the whole thing from beginning to end, the writing, the digital scanning, the research, some people need translation, the book layout, I just do it from A to Z. I'm not a coach. I don't really help people with do-it-yourselfer stuff. But I'm still happy to, if you need a chat, if you're stuck on something, or if you have a question, just like, how do I talk about my stepfather, who was a really nice guy, but I don't want to upset my father or whatever, I'm happy to chat with you about that. Just give me a call. Or if you need a resource, like if people think they can do genealogy themselves and you can get a lot done, but unless you speak multiple languages, if you have Italian ancestors, or if you're Jewish and you don't speak Hebrew, you will need a researcher who speaks these languages. And I know a ton of them. I'm happy to give you names. So give me a call. Happy to help.
Thank you. And I'll link your website and your LinkedIn in the show notes and on YouTube in the comments.
Okay.
So, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your expertise in helping people document their life stories. It's been such a pleasure.
It was my pleasure. It really was. I love talking about this stuff. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, Cheryl.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Clémence Scouten for joining us today. You can learn more about Clémence and Memoirs and More by visiting memoirsandmore.com, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.